with that said, let's get started. You know, I thought in terms of themes for VantagePoint in the way the release was designed this time, and we thought in terms of allowing you to look at your data from a high level in a number of ways, and we have enhanced to a large degree the refined features of the platform, and added a really robust number of different graphics to help with conveying your information, all of which can be exported out and put into your PowerPoint or whatever presentation environments that you use. With regard to looking from a high level, we have added a feature that clusters records. Some of you may be familiar with the topographic feature that was introduced, oh gosh, many years ago, that is now found in a lot of different platforms. We have done that to a large extent, allowing you to control both the fields that are being fed to the analysis for clustering the algorithms, and as well as giving you a choice of 4 different algorithms. So I'll demonstrate briefly how that works, and then throughout the show, the presentation, I'll be demonstrating these features. On the flip side of that, if you can say that, we at VantagePoint at Search Technology are very focused on really text mining and looking at terminology. And we have developed this concept grid idea where it takes and shows you the clustering of terms, and the ability to look at in an organized graphic the way the terminology within your entire analysis clusters around certain terms, to just give you the high points within your data, and allow you to explore that. And then lastly, we have, I don't know, for the past several releases, allowed you to search across the entire set of records that you have in your analysis, pinpointing the search, defining which fields and so forth. And we've added to that a number of other capabilities, letting you to actually focus on groups within your data and looking at the records within a group, or the environment of adding notes, adding comments and so forth, being able to search notes. So that's something that we've added. In the refine area, we're starting to work with PatStat data and pulling PatStat information over into data sets. This is through the Augment data feature. And I'll be demonstrating how you can pull over the PatStat, a number of PatStat indicators at the moment, as well as standardized assignees. The define and organize your data using improved graphic dialogue. This is really just allowing you to use the grouping capabilities in a more flexible way, and you'll see what I mean by that. Some of our clients have literally 100 or more groups within their lists, and it's rather cumbersome to plow through that information. So we've allowed you to type to filter to those and so on, and I'll demonstrate that. Duplicate records. You know, there's in the patent field, the families deciding which family member to favor. We're giving you a lot of capabilities in that regard to when you remove duplicates, the longest English abstract, for example, or what country to favor and so forth. And I'll show you that. And control your data with regard to cleaning. This is a minor thing, but significant. When you're cleaning data, you'll notice, especially with regard to affiliation data, there is a number of different entities within a field. It could be 5 universities, and you'd like to break them apart, and we're giving you that ability to clone and then break apart and rename fields within the cleaning capability. And then the environmental, social governance, the green technologies that are in your data. We've come up with a thesaurus that allow you to identify the green IPCs that are defined by WIPO. So our thesaurus actually run across your IPCs, add definitions, able to group lists, and I'll show you some of the flexibility of that. We've enhanced our bubble pie, our bubble chart, and allow you to add pies to your data. A bubble pie chart. Sankey, we've added the Sankey capability within the tool, allowing you up to 5 different fields to build within the Sankey chart, and the flexibility of defining the order of the field and so forth. And then network metrics using centrality calculations to really pinpoint the significant individuals within your data set or within the individuals within a portfolio. So just I won't get into this, but those of you who are longtime users of VantagePoint, this is where these new elements have been added. Better to look at them from the perspective of the new ribbons that we have. So just to kind of give you a sense of some of the changes to the ribbons, and those of you who may be new to VantagePoint, the users basically work within this idea of importing or using the home ribbon, the refine ribbon, the analyze ribbon, and the report ribbon. And in each of these, we've done some changes. So within the home ribbon, the find records, I'll demonstrate a little bit about how searching groups and searching within the notes section is available. Within the refine ribbon, the augmenting data to your data set from PatStat, we'll demonstrate that. And then the idea of removing duplicates or combining records, and primarily in the patent world, but there are sometimes, reasons to combine records in other types of data as well. The big change has been to the analyze ribbon. We've grouped based on this concept of discovering information using the tools within the discover area, classifying information. We've brought out the characteristics of our auto classifier and the smart trainer. We've added some analysis capabilities with regard to exploring in the area of clustering records and so on, and then calculating our network metrics and our automation capabilities. So, enhancing smart trainer, adding these graphics, the cluster records, Sankey, and create concept grid, and then the network metrics to using the centrality calculation capability to evaluate inventor networks, author networks, affiliation networks, and so forth. In the report area, the bubble chart, it's been there, and you'll notice that it gives you now the ability to add a third field, and we'll demonstrate that. And then importantly, the ability to now export your analysis out to third-party tools. Historically, it's been Excel, but now we've added Tableau as well as PowerBI. So let's just jump into this and look at the home ribbon and look at the find records capability. If you're not familiar with this, when you select on the find records capability, it brings up this search function, and it's a drop down where you pick a field and so on. What I've demonstrated here is I've pinpointed a group within the flavor, identified flavor group within the abstracts, and I'm looking for searching the abstracts for the word title, and the results are found in this area in the title window. I'm going to toggle over and just show you briefly to help give you kind of a sense of the tool. And those of you who may be trialing VantagePoint at the moment, this is the summary sheet. As we go through the demonstration, you'll see additional sheets added due to the analysis that we'll be doing, the additional fields. Right now, we're in the Analyze tab. Let's go over to the Home tab. And here's the Find Records area. Select that, And you'll notice that the drop down is pretty much just the fields as you see in the summary sheet. But as you go down further, you'll see the grouping area. So these are all the groups. And groups are basically taking data in lists and organizing it into designated groups. So let's say, for example, I want to look at the flavor information as I showed you in the demonstration, and I'd like to search within those records that are in that data in that group, the abstract, and I want to know just in terms of what I've identified as flavor, specifically sour. Search, find, and you'll see the records popping up here on the left that you can explore and so forth. So that's just one illustration. If I close this out and refresh, you'll notice if I go over to notes and identify with a notes area, important records. Somebody's added a note to a record. And open that up. Oops. I think it's because I have just wanted to refresh this. I just go over and open up a list, go back and refresh and go over to notes.
You typed too far. It's actually note.
Oops.
Notes doesn't match any item. Note did.
Up.
Yep,
My mistake. And then important. And click find. And you'll just see that all throughout the data, when information pops in, these little sticky notes in the data and so forth. So this helps us to help the user identify if, for example, you've shared this data with a subject matter expert, they've gone through the data and added their information, their comments and so forth. You can identify these records in this manner. So that's that. And just going back over to the PowerPoint. Any questions in the chat? I mean, in the Q&A panel.
There was one concerning when is the release going to come out, but I'll address that at the end.
Okay, so in the area of augmenting your data, there's always that matching of information, and as we all know, VantagePoint it supports a variety of different sources of data from different vendors. Their formatting of the patent number needs to be modified to a universal, what we call a universal format, and to allow for the matching of the numbers within your data in the patent area to the format of the numbers within PatStat. And it's a matter of just taking advantage of the further processing as you've selected on, in this case, the publication number field, the publication number long field. Further processing, publication number, and then convert to universal. And once you've done that and your number is universal, then you can go into and open up the Augment data area and see the import information or import using API. And you'll see that I have picked the PatStat indicators. I've picked the universal number. And then when I click OK, this will then allow me to bring up these indicators. So within the data, you'll notice that it gives you a list of codes, IPCs, and then this concept of times primary code, in other words, the first code that was found universally. So this is not specific to your data. This is specific to all the data out there in PatStat. And then the percent of times that the particular record that has or this IPC code has actually granted. So, you know, through sorting, you can find the significant ones that have very few times that it has been found as primary, very few times that it has been granted, just to give you a metric as to the significance of those records. And then you can explore the data. Something that VantagePoint, as we know, is valued is the ability to drill down, open up the records, and look at the information. So that's something. This is just a little more of an example of that. If you'll notice, I've opened up the record that I've identified in this list here, and I can look at the information, look at the abstract, and look at, here's the code itself. And I can modify this field view as well. The concept of working with a more flexible environment around groups. You'll see here that this is a number of groups within the data on a particular field. And if you can imagine this to be much longer, being able to just having to scroll through this to find groups, we've allowed you to now type the field so that when, for example, in this case, we'll pinpoint right to the algal field and so forth. Also being able to add information to a group into multiple groups as well. The remove duplicates, the remove duplicate area within the Refine tab. I've picked the family accession number. I'm pinpointing on the family accession number, and just added a different limitation. So, for example, I want to focus on all the EP records. If a family doesn't have EP, I then would like to focus on those remaining records that have abstracts in English. If for whatever reason they have other information that doesn't match that criteria, then I'll use these other criteria to then just build out the favoring elements within the remove duplicate capability. And the combined duplicates is very similar to what it was, but if you go through and you have checked off omit records, you can at least conveniently omit records within your analysis. So that's something that's been added to the combined duplicates area. To illustrate just a little bit about the idea of being able to split items or to clone and divide items. In this case, this was the combination of the Georgia Institute of Technology in this list, as well as the University of Georgia. And by cloning the field, then you have two identical fields, one of which you'll rename to Georgia Institute of Technology, the other you'll rename to the University of Georgia, so that you can split these out. Very handy, especially again with affiliation information. The using of the green WIPO codes, this is just to give you a feel for just the capabilities of identifying that information. And I'll demonstrate how we do that, looking at the green IPCs versus the non-green IPCs. And this is just some output looking at a company around technology company, a food company, an agribusiness company, and the degree of which their portfolios are dedicated to or classified using IPCs in the green area as well as or versus the not green area. So let's kind of get into this and just show you a little bit of all these functions, these new functions. If I go over and just looking at the Augment data area, the first thing in preparation for that is to make a universal number. So if I go publication number and look at the publication long field and right click on it, you'll notice that I can then do further processing. I can pick further processing of the number, and then I can convert to a universal number. And by selecting this, it'll take my information in this field and make a new field and give it the indicator that it's been converted to universal. And then these are the converted numbers. So once I have this, I can then go into the area of augmenting data and add information from an online database, in this case, the PatStat data. But this is really an illustrative of thinking about using API data from others as well. So, this indication of the power of this, here we are going to pick the API for the indicators from PatStat, and we need the field to match up. So we're going to take our universal field and run with that. So here it is down here. And then these are the resulting field that's going to come about. So if I click OK, it's going out. You have to have access to the internet, obviously, and it's importing this information. So this is what's been imported. These are the fields that have now been generated in your data. Click OK and go back over to the summary sheet. You'll notice that we now have that indicator information. So if we go and open this up, you'll be able to see what I mean by looking at these different times primary, looking through the codes, sorting on this, being able to identify the ones that are maybe less identified as percent granted, these 4 documents, and then being able to, and oh, by the way, I should probably been enlarging this to allow you to see this. Sorry about that. And then looking at the records. And this is classic, opening up the record, showing up over here on the other screen, but just let it build out and give you a sense of being able to look at that record and so on. Go to the next one, so on and so forth. So that's the augmenting data with PatStat. The grouping is very straightforward. Let's go back over the summary sheet. I'm going to close this out and just look for maybe a field that has, so here I've added, there's 6 groups within this data. If I open this up, and you'll notice that these are the different, these texture, flavor. If I wanted to, say, for example, add another group, like if I wanted to use the find function and go in and say production. Select all, add to group. You'll see here are my groups, and had this been a very long group or long list, I can then, stable, add to that, or add my production group, and so on. So this is just more convenient in terms of working with our grouping functionality. Just going back over, I'm sorry, just going into the next part. Let's just work with the green IPCs. So going back over to the summary sheet, I'm just going to close this sheet out. We don't need this anymore. I'm going to close this sheet out, and go back over to the summary sheet. And look at our IPCs. So IPCs, open them up, and you'll notice that I'd like to add definitions for the green information. It's a matter of taking advantage of our thesaurus functionality in the Refine tab and opening, and I'm going to call these now, it's going to generate a new field once the definition has been added, and pick the thesaurus. So this is our library of thesauruses, and you'll see here the IPC WIPO green. I'm also going to tell the system to only give me the items that are in the list and do not show the ones that weren't found. And pick the wrong one. Just real quick, if I delete this, go back over and just do it real quick again. Thesaurus, I'll just leave the number there, use the green, go into more, and here we go. So these are now the green IPCs within the data. But what I like to do is instead take advantage of the grouping characteristics of VantagePoint with regard to thesauruses, which is very powerful. If I go back over to that list, and I'm just navigating back over to that list, and instead of adding the definitions, I want to group this list based on that thesaurus. So if I group using a thesaurus, I'm in essence going to just basically pick that same thesaurus and then just go with the defaults. And you'll see that these are the greens. And what am I going to do with this now? I'm going to just build out the green and non-green by using the edit groups area. Very, very, very handy. If I select all these green groups, I can then use the OR function, and I'm going to call these my green. So now we have the green group, and these are all of the green information. And what about the ones that are not green? Well, if you right click, you'll notice invert selection, and then I can add those to a group. So add selection to group, and these are my not green. And now I have the ability to look at these two fields in a number of ways using the, like, for example, create field from group names. I'm going to really select just those two, the green and not green, and I'm going to give them, you know, a name. And here I have now these two identifiers, which then allows me to look at least in using the analysis or the reporting capability over here, a pie chart. And there is some overlap, but you'll see that we now can run through this and maybe tidy it up, maybe use the visualization functions. I'd rather have the color be green. In this case, choose that. I'd rather have the color be yellow, and so on. And then also the fonts and so forth. And building out the terminology that I might want to identify, enlarging, and so on. And then exporting this image, maybe to a PNG image that you could then upload into your presentation and so on. So, you know, this is just one just capability that we can work with that information in a number of ways. So that's kind of just playing around with the green information. So yeah, any questions now as we just?
Yes, actually we do.
Yeah, let me I can cover these because these are near and dear to my heart. The first one is on APIs. The API connection we have to PatStat is because we got tired of dealing with everybody else's APIs and their problems. So we host our own version of PatStat, and we built our own API system around that just to test the functionality and test all the underlying things. We've also made connections to other people's APIs. Say, for instance, Orbis for business data information. We've hooked into a couple of different government databases. We can also hook into private sector ones. Those have been the most problematic because they have limiters on the keys and things like that. But yes, we have an API tool we've had in VantagePoint for a while, and we're looking for databases to connect out to. And as long as a key can be constructed from your data, in other words, a link out, then you can link out to a third-party database and bring in that information and append it to your data. In other words, making your data set much richer than it was to begin with. And so, yeah, someone's typed in the ORCID identifier. Sure. We haven't played with the ORCID API, and we don't know what the restrictions are on that, but definitely something we could do. Another question is on the clone spit functionality. That's actually was a little feature we added in because we were dealing a lot with Medline data, PubMed data, while we're doing some work on COVID, and it's very annoying because some of the affiliations are actually, they're not delimited. It's just and. It's two organizations separated by the word and to have to go through and add another delimiter called and hope you don't break anything else. Says Texas A&M and someone has spelled it out. Actually, Texas A&M wouldn't work. Never mind. Any institution with and in it, you don't want to break it. But the cloning allows us to kind of fix that and do that on a manual level. But on the question related to, multiple authors and affiliations and assigning which author goes with which affiliation, that gets more into when we do the initial import. and working with our help desk can help you. If that data are in the record, we can get to it. It's just working with our help desk to make sure we bring it in. A good example of that was in the old days, Web of Science would list the organizations and list the people, but wouldn't connect the two. And now they do, and we can pull that in accordingly. Let's see some of the other questions that just rolled in. Possible categorize additional field, respective columns, same data set at the end of the process. I need to look at those ones, and right now the APIs, as I mentioned, I've covered that. We have PatStat and a few others, and if you have questions about that, just ask us. And the PatStat database, or how do we standardize Pat-based assignee data? You can pull in the assignee standardized from PatStat if you wanted to, for instance. But anyway, I want to stop there because I don't want to cut into Rick's time. But if you have any other questions, do enter them into the chat panel, and we will address them either now in these breaks or at the end of the session.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nels. So let's just jump into the Analyze ribbon and look at these functions that have been added or enhanced. A lot that goes on in the auto classification area using Smart Trainer. It involves basically reading through and adding information or classifying them based on something the user has set up. In this case, I set up meat properties. I'm interested in classifying flavor and texture. I also defined, a disregard. And this is something that was available in an early release, our Smart Trainer. Not to get into it, but one thing that was missing was the ability to add additional fields. These fields come with the Smart Trainer by virtue of the fact that the user has the ability to define what fields to use in the training. And the algorithms are really meant to be used against text information. So we, with our import filters, identify those text fields and label them as training fields and so forth. But there's these additional capability of adding information using the field order function within the top of the record view of the Smart Trainer and adding information. So for example, I've added the defined IPC8s to help with whether or not do I click this off as texture when I go to the next record, do I define this as flavor or maybe disregard. So that's something that was asked for, and so we thought it's very useful to add that. Here's the cluster record capability, probably something that's everybody's familiar with. We've given you the ability to cluster records based on those training fields. So previously, when I showed you the Smart Trainer, the training field, the title, the abstract, that is what's being used to cluster the information here. So you have the ability to define what to use in terms of clustering records, any field that's in the data to do that. So there's a lot of flexibility in that sense. You also have, just not going to demonstrate the use of 4 different clustering algorithms. So, to see the differences. And what this illustrates is that we have a field that talks about properties, flavor, and so forth, using that to key off of identifying them, and then dragging and identifying the records and using the title window to look at those records in more detail and so forth. And I'll demonstrate this. But this is the cluster record capability. Here's Sankey. Sankey is something that's quite popular, and we thought, okay, why don't we not only allow the users to build Sankey, but Sankey off of any field within your data, as well as the ability to add up to 5 fields within the data. So, I've picked, I believe, the classifications that I identified when I auto-classified, texture, flavor, how they flow into certain key assignees within the data, and then because this data, and I didn't really thank PatBase, but they have allowed us to use their data within this analysis. The dead or alive fields within the PatBase data is allowing you to look at that information. So I'll demonstrate building of these as well. And here's the concept grid. So the concept grid is really looking at the NLP, refined NLP field, and looking at the terminology that really terms are frequently found together within a record, within the records within the data set, and then it identifies them in terms of kind of a hierarchical grid. There's 53 records that talk about amino acids, and then these particular elements cluster around amino acid. And you can look at the 53 records. You can look at the flavor elements within that are secondary to this clustering. And so this is something that you can browse through and look at the information, but also it generates and groups your refined NLP list based on these elements too, that you can take into your analysis even further based on those groups. And I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. And then here's our network metrics. It's based on measuring centrality within a particular identified field. In this case, it's the inventor field that was cleaned. Here are the different elements: the betweenness, the closeness, the degree. The betweenness, really how they are operating, an individual operates within their own particular domain versus the entire domain within the data, and then the number of linkages or connections that they actually have. So Rachel Fraser, they actually link out to 13 other individuals. But they also, those other individuals might be linking out to other individuals. So the degree of closeness, the information that passes through Rachel is rather significant if you compare that. And these are sortable fields, but she seems to be really within her own world, really operating in I don't want to say limited sense, but just allowing you to get a sense of how they fit within your data set in that regard. Are they local to the company they operate in, or is, for whatever reason, also operating with individuals that maybe link out to other individuals and so forth. So, this whole concept of betweenness, closeness, degree, it all wrapped up into what we've come up with is a keystone. And it allows you to identify individuals within your data as to the most significant based on the harmonic average across all this information. So you can sort and identify these records. So it's a big improvement over just looking at frequency, because you're looking at networks of individuals, right? You're looking at not only this individual and who they link to, but the people that they link to, who are they linking to, and so forth and so on, based on these centrality characteristics. So that's quite handy. So let's just kind of jump over real quick, looking at my time, and talk a little more about this. So quickly, the Smart Trainer. So I'm going to go to the Analyze tab and just pick the Smart Trainer and open it up. Bring it over, and you'll see the training fields. I've set up my classifications here, and I want to add information to this so that it'll help me in terms of how to classify. So if I go over to this area, and let's just, my defined IPCs. So here are my defined IPCs. I'd like to add those, and maybe my assignee. So let's just go with our cleaned assignees and add those as well. So once we click OK, we'll be able to see that information as we classify. Just add that, use a Smart Trainer to randomly pick, not randomly, but algorithmically pick the next record and so forth. So this is just allowing you to do smart training in a little more efficient way using these additional fields. Okay, so that's that. Let's just real quick look at the clustering of records. It's simply looking using this icon, it's all set up, and you basically select it. And it gives you a little warning. This is a very process-intensive process. There's about 1,000 records in this data set. It should take about 25 seconds to run this, if my timing is all correct. So you can see the operation going along here, and it will build out and show you the results here in a minute. Okay, so now we're just loading the graphic.
While this is loading, I believe there's a question from Deepak Kumar, who has his hand raised.
So go ahead.
Yeah, hi Rick. I have a question. Rick, how do we standardize PAT-based assignee data?
So I went through and used the cleaning capability within VantagePoint. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you know, the terminology standardized is something that has come across from the data of PAT-based, and then I've added my cleaning capability to that. There's a lot of variation in names, such as Nestec, Nestle, that I use the cleaning capability to combine those records and so on. Are you familiar with the cleaning function?
I'm sorry, Rick, we are still in the exploratory phase. Maybe if you can, take out some time and show me that thing.
Okay, yes, we can get back to you about that. It's very simple,
Okay.
very brief to demonstrate.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, it builds out to thesauruses, so that cleaning is retained within a thesaurus that can be used later. But here, what do we do with this information? I clicked on the gear to bring in this additional capability. One of which is this drop down will show me fields that have no more than 7 items within the field. So for example, the green, not green, has 2 items, right? So if I select that, it's going to run through and calculate and identify the various dots that are associated with this green, not green. So or if I go in and I had identified different properties within my data, if I select that, it'll run through and refresh. And once it's done that, you can go in and explore those records. Like, for example, I'd like to look at the items that fall together within, I'm going to close out this, that are within this region. And I'd like to see those properties. So if I pull out those properties, here's texture, flavor. I'd like to look at the stability items. So you'll see that I've identified those, and I can look at those. Or maybe I'd like to look at the cleaned assignees. If I pull that in, you'll see here is the cleaned assignee information. I want to look at basically this particular assignee, and you look at their records and so forth. So, I not only, I want to make sure that everybody understands, yes, we've added functionality, but really it's the drill down characteristics and be able to explore once you've established these new features. So let's just jump over to the concept grid. Concept grid is asking, what field would you like us to apply these algorithms to? And we have taken the NLP data and applied our refine function to it. So it cleans up the data, gets rid of extraneous, especially within the patent literature, things like disclosure, words that really don't add anything to the analysis. And then it's going to build out. So this will take a minute. Here's our list of terminology. And you'll see as it goes through this process, the building of groups. So it's doing its calculations. its clustering calculations. And once it's finished, it'll start giving you these groups. And these groups are quite handy to pull into your analysis that the system has identified. So just take a second here. While this is working out, any questions in the Q&A, Nels?
We cleaned it out.
Okay. So you see these groups. So you'll notice food. These will all be built out into a graphic that you can interact with. Okay, so not too long. And now we have, the idea of looking through this for the terminology that identifies records that have terms that are clustering in around certain terms. Like amino acids has these various pea protein, minerals, and so on within this plant-based meat data. If I wanted to look at the information around emulsions, there's 23 records. And again, just opening them up and looking at the records themselves, exploring in this case, I've defined the assignees and so forth. These additional windows allow you to explore the information within whatever you've selected in that panel. But the other thing is, if I jump over to the summary, and I'm just going to navigate back to that summary sheet, the very beginning sheet, and I'm going to go away and look at the PCD information, you'll see that if I open up this, just sort this here. Oop, wrong one. Here's my abstract that when I pull it up, you'll see all of these groups. And one nice feature about this is that I have now these different groups of records that are built within these identified clustered terms that I'd like to see how they interact. And one thing that's very popular within the tool is building a field based on these identifying groups. And it's a simple matter of you going into create field from group names and then picking all of the fields. I'm not going to use other, and then just go with the default name here. And you'll notice now I have all of these different functions that I can take into my different report functionality. So for example, I'm really just interested in analyzing the crossover in the report area based on clustering. So you'll see here that there's a lot here, but I'd like to know just the interactions of certain elements. So if I just go through and unselect everything, and I can begin to look at, I'm interested in texture as it relates to emulsion and how possibly adding in the starch area. And now you see how, if I work this out, these different groups here, just bringing them apart, you can see that I can identify the records that talk about texture and emulsion, or the records that talk about texture and starch, and so on and so forth, or the records of emulsion and starch and so on. So this is something that is very useful in terms of just understanding the crossover between these different clustered groups. And again, exploring the records, very, very important, be able to drill down. So that's the concept grid. Seeing our time, about 10 minutes left. Let's look at the Sankey diagram. So back over to the Analyze tab. If I go into Sankey, it's going to ask what fields. I have up to 5, you'll note here. And I'm going to work with my properties information. So those are the properties that I identified earlier within the refined NLP data that I've identified. I'm interested in certain companies. I've identified target companies that I would like to work with. So those are the target companies I'd like to work with, and then maybe the family countries. So you'll notice the family countries here. So if I select those, and it's just the order, you'll notice I can drag and drop and change the order. I think I'll leave the order as I've established and click OK. And now you can see, the different characteristics that I've built into the data based on my analysis as they relate, as they flow into the different companies. And then interestingly enough, how broad these companies are filing their portfolios in terms of different countries and so on. And so it's just a little idea about the Sankey capability. Jumping over to network analysis. Got to find the field, inventor field. I have here inventor cleaned, so we'll just take the whole data and open that up, and it'll run here. I've also taken a minute to identify and isolate out the inventors within different organizations, the impossible corporations inventors, just to see how they relate to each other. But now you begin to see just how we can find these important individuals by sorting, this Christoph Schmidt on the 5 records, and who do they work with? So I can go in and put in my inventor. Here's my inventor clean data. And you'll notice that if I look up, here is Joe's, and by the way, let me, I'm sure everybody's having a hard time reading this because these things are so big, but let's maybe make this a little bigger, bring this over here, come over here, make this much bigger there. So, you don't have any eye strain going on. But you'll see that having selected Schmidt, you can begin to see where they work with different individuals. Coming down here to Joseph, Mr. Joseph, you notice that Mr. Joseph has a much lower betweenness, and that's because he's not co-authoring outside of the world that he operates in with Mr. Schmidt. So these centrality measures can be very useful. If you want to, you can just isolate different company inventors and so on. So just moving on here real quick, we can go over to now the report ribbon. So this is our bubble pies. I'll just quickly just show you how to build those. Very, very similar to building out our other pie capability, and then exporting out to Tableau and Power BI. One thing to be aware of, it's a warning that we like to tag on to this export. You're going to end up with many rows of data because we end up breaking apart the analysis into many-to-many relationships, whereas these different products or these different platforms have one-to-many, and so that's a characteristic that you just have to deal with. Just going over real quick to show that, I'm going to jump over to the report tab. Here's the pie. Oops, that's not what I want. I want the bubble pie characteristic. So let's go back over and look at the bubble pie. So opens up a dialog. You'll see here asking for elements, and I've already found them. Here is my target companies. You'll notice pulling them off of my list of fields. Here is my my priority information, basically the 2011 to the 2020 time period, running that, and then taking that information and pulling that into this bubble pie. And now I mean this bubble chart, but now I want to add this third field information. So for example, here again, very similar to what we showed you on the cluster map. Here's the green elements. Interesting enough how Impossible Foods is really the only one that does this. I can move this cursor and make it a little more prominent within my analysis. Let's just pick our properties field. So allows you to just work and show the change over time. So that's about it. Just, there's not much to show you in terms of just going over to reports, export, but you'll see that you have a lot of flexibility in terms of fields you want to export, and you can build in templates depending on the data that you're working with. And here's the drop down to Tableau and Power BI. So I think that we can kind of, I believe, wrap it up. But just to kind of summarize, we've gone through a lot here. And we have, according to my timing, about 3 minutes left. And just kind of have people review this list and see if there's any questions based on what they see.
Oh, the most important question is, when is this product going to be available? Yeah, you can probably tell from my smirk, I'm a little frustrated about that. It was supposed to be out a couple of days ago. We had a problem with a third-party vendor's little component, and oddly enough, the little yellow bar that says click here to update, they updated something and it caused everything to break. But we have resolved that, and we should have this thing out either later today or early tomorrow. So everything else is done. We just couldn't get the update bar, the yellow update bar to work. So anyway, the joys of software development. But anyway, we should have this thing ready to go for you, like I said, later today or early tomorrow. And we're looking forward to you guys trying this thing out. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat now, or we can follow up with our help desk, or follow up with Rick as well. And then Webb wants to say a few things. So fire away, Webb.
Send the questions to me. I love questions, and we'd be happy to do individual Zoom meetings with anybody who needs a more focused tour on any of these things that we've demonstrated today.
Absolutely. And I do want to plug, we do have some excellent tip videos that Rick has prepared, particularly around the tremendous power of creating groups. So there are a couple of ones on creating groups, from creating plethora, creating groups from matrices, and list comparison. So
Rick, can you go to the website? Just project the website on the screen, so to make sure people are aware of these new resources that are being made available.
Yeah, so I will. I have it open. I will quickly stop.
So I'll stop sharing.
Yep.
How fast can we share a website? There we go.
Here is our VantagePoint playlist, and Nils has posted it in the Q&A and Q&A section. You can find that. There are.
You can also get to this from the VantagePoint main page.
Exactly.
Just click on the little YouTube icon.
Exactly.
And it'll take you right to this.
I can read them. I know that the font is small.
Nope, it's good. It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
Great. So,
okay.
We are coming, on the end of the hour. Any final statements? This video, of course, the recording is available for all of you to view again and to share with your colleagues. And as Webb already offered, please don't stop the questions. We love to answer them, and we'll answer them personally.
And do route them to our help desk, though, so that not only Webb gets them.